Abundance. The future is better than you think. By Peter H. Diamandis and Steven Kotler. Narrated by Arthur Morey. Copyright 2012 by Peter H. Diamandis and Steven Kotler. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Peter Diamandis, Steven Kotler, and Brockman Incorporated, and was produced in the year 2012 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. A note from the authors. A historical perspective. These are turbulent times. A quick glance at the headlines is enough to set anybody on edge, and with the endless media stream that has lately become our lives, it's hard to get away from those headlines. Worse, evolution shaped the human brain to be acutely aware of all potential dangers. As will be explored in later chapters, this dire combination has a profound impact on human perception. It literally shuts off our ability to take in good news. This creates something of a challenge for us, as abundance is a tale of good news. At its core, this book examines the hard facts, the science and engineering, the social trends and economic forces that are rapidly transforming our world. But we are not so naive as to think that there won't be bumps along the way. Some of those will be big bumps: economic meltdowns, natural disasters, terrorist attacks. During these times, the concept of abundance will seem far off, alien, even nonsensical. But a quick look at history shows that progress continues through the good times and the bad. The 20th century, for example, witnessed both incredible advancement and unspeakable tragedy. The 1918 influenza epidemic killed 50 million people. World War II killed another 60 million. There were tsunamis, hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, floods, even plagues of locusts. Despite such unrest, this period also saw infant mortality decrease by 90%. Maternal mortality decreased by 99%, and overall, human lifespan increase by more than 100%. In the past 2 decades, the United States has experienced tremendous economic upheaval. Yet today, even the poorest Americans have access to a telephone, television, and a flush toilet. 3 luxuries that even the wealthiest couldn't imagine at the turn of the last century. In fact, as will soon be clear, using almost any metric currently available, quality of life has improved more in the past century than ever before. So, while there are likely to be plenty of rude, heartbreaking interruptions along the way, as this book will demonstrate, global living standards will continue to improve, regardless of the horrors that dominate the headlines. If it bleeds, it leads. Every second, an avalanche of data pours in through our senses. To process this deluge, the brain is continuously sifting and sorting information, trying to tease apart the critical from the casual. And since nothing is more critical to the brain than survival, the first filter most of this incoming information encounters is the amygdala. The amygdala is an almond-shaped sliver of the temporal lobe responsible for primal emotions like rage, hate, and fear. It's our early warning system, an organ always on high alert, whose job is to find anything in our environment that could threaten survival. Anxious under normal conditions, once stimulated, the amygdala becomes hypervigilant. Then our focus tightens and our fight-or-flight response turns on. Heart rate speeds up, nerves fire faster, eyes dilate for improved vision, the skin cools as blood moves toward our muscles for faster reaction times. Cognitively, our pattern recognition system scours our memories, hunting for similar situations to help ID the threat, and potential solutions to help neutralize the threat. But so potent is this response that once turned on, it's almost impossible to shut off. And this is a problem in the modern world. These days we are saturated with information. We have millions of news outlets competing for our mind share. And how do they compete? By vying for the amygdala's attention. The old newspaper saw, "If it bleeds, it leads," works because the first stop that all incoming information encounters is an organ already primed to look for danger. We're feeding a fiend. Pick up the Washington Post and compare the number of positive to negative stories. If your experiment goes anything like mine, you'll find that over 90% of the articles are pessimistic. Quite simply, good news doesn't catch our attention. Bad news sells, because the amygdala is always looking for something to fear. But this has an immediate impact on our perception. David Eagleman, a neuroscientist at Baylor College of Medicine, explains that even under mundane circumstances, attention is a limited resource. Imagine you're watching a short film with a single actor cooking an omelet. The camera cuts to a different angle as the actor continues cooking. Surely you would notice if the actor changed into a different person, right? 2/3 of observers don't. This happens because attention is a seriously limited resource, and once we're focused on one thing, we often don't notice the next. Of course, any fear response only amplifies the effect. What all of this means is that once the amygdala begins hunting bad news, it's mostly going to find bad news. Compounding this, our early warning system evolved in an era of immediacy, when threats were of the tiger-in-the-bush variety. Things have changed since. Many of today's dangers are probabilistic. The economy might nosedive, there could be a terrorist attack, and the amygdala can't tell the difference. Worse, the system is also designed not to shut off until the potential danger has vanished completely, but probabilistic dangers never vanish completely. Add in an impossible-to-avoid media continuously scaring us in an attempt to capture market share, and you have a brain convinced that it's living in a state of siege, a state that's especially troubling, as New York University's Dr. Mark Siegel explains in his book False Alarm, The Truth About the Epidemic of Fear, because nothing could be further from the truth. Statistically, the industrialized world has never been safer. Many of us are living longer and more uneventfully. Nevertheless, we live in worst-case fear scenarios. Over the past century, we Americans have dramatically reduced our risk in virtually every area of life, resulting in lifespans 60% longer in 2000 than in 1900. Antibiotics have reduced the likelihood of dying from infections. Public health measures dictate standards for drinkable water and breathable air. Our garbage is removed quickly. We live in temperature-controlled, disease-controlled lives. And yet, we worry more than ever before. The natural dangers are no longer there, but the response mechanisms are still in place, and now they are turned on much of the time. We implode, turning our adaptive fear mechanism into a maladaptive, panicked response. For abundance, all this carries a triple penalty. First, it's hard to be optimistic because the brain's filtering architecture is pessimistic by design. Second, good news is drowned out, because it's in the media's best interest to overemphasize the bad. Third, scientists have recently discovered an even bigger cost. It's not just that these survival instincts make us believe that the hole we're in is too deep to climb out of, but they also limit our desire to climb out of that hole. A desire to better the world is predicated partially on empathy and compassion. The good news is that we now know that these pro-social behaviors are hardwired into the brain. The bad news is that these behaviors are wired into the slower-moving, recently evolved prefrontal cortex. But the amygdala evolved long ago in an era of immediacy, when reaction time was critical for survival. When there's a tiger in the bush, there isn't much time to think, so the brain takes a shortcut. It doesn't. In dangerous situations, the amygdala directs information around the prefrontal cortex. This is why you jump backward when you see a squiggly shape on the ground, before you have time to deduce stick, not snake. But because of the difference in neuronal processing speeds, once our primitive survival instincts take over, our newer, pro-social instincts stay sidelined. Compassion, empathy, altruism, even indignation become non-factors. Once the media has us on high alert, for example, the chasm between rich and poor looks too big to bridge because the very emotions that would make us want to close that gap are currently locked out of the system.